whereas how have LPs kind of been talking to you of late?
Yeah, I'll just take the point about the domestic LPs. They are becoming a little more significant player. We've raised over $1 billion across various funds that Tata Group has, and about 10% of that is domestic institutions, primarily banks, insurance companies, development institutions. And of course, there is a big market for investment from individual investors, but that's a much smaller component of this overall 100 million. So you are beginning to see some money. That's a more stable source of capital also, because if you know, those of who have white hairs like me would remember that the first venture capital fund in India was by Indian investors. UTI started it out, what was called Venture Capital Fund of India, VECAUS 1, back in I think 88 or 89. So Indian institutions have been investing. Unfortunately, the more successful funds have been foreign funds, because they have got global best practices and they have got real value to add with us. Indian LP only funds have not done so well. Hopefully, with the commingling of funds like what we have a domestic vehicle and an international vehicle, that should change, and Indian LPs should also start seeing returns from the investments.
Yeah, just to respond to that, I think you hit the nail on the head. This issue of managing LP expectations is absolutely critical from our perspective. And as over the last year or two, we've been interacting with a lot of existing LPs, but also new LPs who we may potentially want to attract in the next fund that we raise. It's good and encouraging to know that there still is a lot of interest in India. India is very high up on their radar, and they acknowledge that they cannot ignore India. However, they all are now consistently, they've got the stick out. They want to see returns first before they re-up or they make fresh commitments to you. So at this point in time, they've all been invested. I mean, a lot of them have been invested for a reasonable degree of time in India and want to see returns. So that's from the overall global LP base. From the domestic LP perspective, I just want to say that one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of the biggest things that we need to do to develop the Indian private equity ecosystem is to develop an Indian LP base. And that is developing, but it's still small. I think, as Akhil very correctly said, the best estimate is about 10% of the size of the overall LP pool in India. Over time, we expect that this will develop. I remember maybe almost a decade ago when we were raising our fund for IDFC, that was probably the largest fund that was raised from domestic LPs only. We raised up about 1,000 crores at that point, and $200 million. And thankfully, a lot of those LPs, which are essentially banks, insurance companies and financial institutions, not all, but a lot of them have continued to invest in private equity. And subsequent to that, now there are a larger number of funds that have raised money. Some of these have been domestic only, and some of these have been co-mingled with their international and domestic fundraise. But certainly, very, very big priority for the industry is to develop a domestic LP base.
Great. I think we'll take one final question from the audience. Those of you who haven't got the chance, please feel free to grab one of the panelists afterwards. Please, sir.
Okay. The growth in India during the last decade has been fueled by various factors, demand and supply, the cost advantage that India can offer. And I think the cost leadership was one of the things, the body shops or providing the solutions in time. This question is really from outside in perspective. As an American basic, we saw a lot of jobs moving to India primarily because in America people were not doing it. But in order to have the sustainable growth, long-term standing, there has to be a product differentiation. My question is going about is, does India have any kind of innovation or something that will make us feel that investing in India for long-term is going to be sustainable? Because we do see challenge, all these things have very small barrier to entry. The countries like Philippines, Russia, China can also enter into the market that India is really growing. And we are seeing that happening.
Thank you, sir. I think I understand your question.
Thank you.
Broadly goes to the point, why would you invest in India? Does it have a sustainable competitive advantage in the long term? Does anyone want to take that?
I mean, I'll give a very blanket answer, but I think the big opportunity is the fact how, it's just the fact of how early it is in so many sectors. So both penetration as well as, just the fundamental supply demand that you talked about. It's not an edge. You wouldn't normally define as an edge, but the power of compounding is powerful. And so these industries growing at 10, 15% a year for a very defined, long future create wonderful investment opportunities. So for me, I don't think it's one defined skill set that India has, but the opportunity set.
And just to add, my perspective on that in comparing against China, I really fear in the next 10 years for China, when their demographic dividend goes away in 2015, their working population starts to decline for the first time. The fact that so much of their growth has been investment-led versus India. So the short answer to your question, sir, is number one, it's a huge market and will continue to grow. And number two, in the industries or services that we serve abroad, I think there are no other global markets that are of scale with that same skill set, and that is the competitive advantage in terms of the global marketplace. With that,
I'll add one more point
Sure.
there, Shashank, which is, as you see the services industry in India, despite all the exciting ground that it employs only 3 million people. The largest company, TCS, has 300,000 people. So if you add up all the employment that is there, it's just 3 million people. India has to focus on manufacturing, which is what China has done, to really get employment at a much higher scale. And we are seeing a lot of interesting companies in that space that are becoming global leaders. So in fact, Naveen is invested in one of them, which it's a consumables company that it provides parts for the industrial companies. We're seeing many more companies in plastics and chemicals and value-added chemicals, various variety of companies in the industrial space, manufacturing space that are actually world-class leaders and have a lot of innovation, maybe process innovation, but a lot of innovation. So I think there is, I feel a lot of hope there for Indian companies. There is a barrier to entry in a lot of these companies. And I think manufacturing may be the next story for India in the next few years.
Great, thank you. With that, I'd like to thank my panelists. You've given a fascinating perspective on the industry, on the economy, and on the marketplace for investment in India. Thank you very much.